Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into a case that really shook a small town, Morgantown, West Virginia.
Yeah, went on to grab worldwide attention.
It did, the murder of Skyler Neese.
Yeah.
And for this one, you guys sent us a ton of material.
Yeah.
Audio interviews, court documents.
Social media posts. It's a lot.
It's a lot to go through. So we're gonna try to make sense of it all, pull out those most important pieces, and see if we can gain some insight into this complex story.
It is a fascinating case. I think the reason it continues to intrigue people is because it unveils the often hidden complexities of teenage relationships, especially in this modern age where everyone's connected all the time.
Right. It's like this sort of, it's like an iceberg, right?
Yeah.
Everything on the surface seems normal, even, picture perfect. But underneath, there's all this stuff going on. Jealousy, manipulation,
Violence.
violence that we don't always see.
Exactly. And this case brings those hidden currents to the surface in a really dramatic way. And I think to really understand how this tragedy unfolded, we need to start by understanding Skyler Neese. 16 years old, July 2012, living with her parents in Morgantown. In many ways, she was your typical teenager, loved her dog, Lulu, shopping, hanging out with friends.
Yeah. From everything I've seen in the source material, it seems like she was a really caring person, too. Her aunt describes her as being a champion for the underdog, always sticking up for others.
Yes. And that's an important detail to keep in mind as we go through all of this. The sources consistently paint this picture of Skyler as a bright, empathetic girl, fiercely loyal to her friends. And that comes through not only in her interactions with her family, but also in her tweets defending others and her willingness to overlook red flags in her friendships.
Yeah,
It makes the events that followed even more heartbreaking.
absolutely. And at the heart of this story are Skylar's two best friends, Sheila and Rachel. These three were basically inseparable. Vacations together, posting on social media constantly, like documenting every single move. It's almost like they were living their lives for this online audience.
It's an important point to bring up. I mean, this was 2012, and social media was rapidly gaining popularity, especially among teenagers. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook were becoming central to their social lives, shaping their identities, and they were influencing their interactions in ways that I don't even think we fully understood yet.
Right. So it makes you wonder if these were these online personas masking deeper insecurities or resentments. Was there like a disconnect between their online selves and their offline selves?
That's a question that comes up a lot, and it's definitely something that's explored throughout the material. This picture-perfect image they projected online, it often clashed with the reality of their relationships, There were cracks in the foundation of this friendship, particularly between Skylar and Sheila.
Yeah, it's like the more we look at their online interactions, the more apparent these cracks become. You see hints of jealousy, subtle attempts to control the narrative, a constant need for validation.
And what's really fascinating here is the power dynamic that emerges. Sheila, being the only one with a car, held a certain amount of control over the group. It's a classic example of what psychologists call triangulation. One person manipulating the relationship between two others to kind of exert control. And Sheila's access to a car amplified that dynamic, giving her a literal and metaphorical means of control over the group's activities, over their social interactions.
Okay, so we have this seemingly tight-knit group of friends, but with this underlying tension,
Mm.
particularly between Skylar and Sheila. And as we dig into the source material, those cracks start to widen. Those tensions escalate.
Right. We start to see, for example, in Skylar's diary, entries this growing sense of betrayal and mistrust towards her friends, especially towards Sheila. She even posted some pretty cryptic messages on Twitter, hinting at feeling hurt and manipulated.
And her cousin even warned her mother about Sheila and Rachel, said something felt off about that friendship. So there were all these warning signs, but they were ignored or dismissed as just, typical teenage drama.
And these warning signs, they become incredibly chilling in hindsight. They remind us how these seemingly small conflicts can escalate within these intense friendships, especially when they're fueled by the dynamics of social media and the pressure to maintain a certain image. Like the line between online and offline, it becomes increasingly blurred, and those online conflicts can spill over into real life.
Then comes that fateful day, July 6, 2012. Skylar vanishes. Last image of her is from this grainy security camera showing her sneaking out of her window late at night to meet someone waiting in a car.
And this is where the story really takes a sharp turn. This shift from missing person to a potential homicide investigation. It hinges on two things: the inconsistencies in Sheila and Rachel's accounts of that night, and the foreshadowing in Skylar's own words.
Yeah, they initially told her parents that they had dropped her off at the end of her street. But there were holes in their story from the very beginning.
Yeah, and the more the investigators pressed, the more those inconsistencies grew. And when you layer in those cryptic tweets from Skylar, those expressions of mistrust and hurt, it paints a very different picture of what might have happened that night.
But before we get to the investigation and what really happened to Skylar, let's make a step back. Before the focus shifted to Sheila and Rachel,
Mm.
what was some of the prevailing theories in the community about Skylar's disappearance? Was anyone else even considered a suspect?
Oh, yeah. Initially, there was a lot of speculation, Some people thought she might have run away. Others feared she'd been abducted by a stranger.
Right.
I mean, the town, Morgantown, it's a small town, and they hadn't seen a case like this before. So there was a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I can imagine. A young girl vanishes without a trace.
Hmm.
Everyone's trying to piece together what happened. It must have been just incredibly difficult for her family and her friends,
Yeah.
not knowing.
Absolutely. And as the days turned into weeks and then weeks into months, that hope of finding Skylar alive, it started to dwindle. The investigation intensified, and law enforcement really began to focus their attention on Sheila and Rachel.
Right.
Remember, these were the last people known to have seen her, and their stories were full of inconsistencies.
Right. And their behavior after Skylar's disappearance, that didn't help either. Sheila, for instance, posted a tweet just hours after Skylar went missing that said, "Always keep your cool."
Mm.
It's chilling when you consider the circumstances. It's
Yeah.
almost like she was trying to maintain this facade of normalcy while her friend was missing.
Exactly. And that wasn't the only instance of their online behavior raising red flags. Investigators started digging into their social media activity in the weeks leading up to Skylar's disappearance. And it revealed a lot about the dynamics of their friendship.
So what were they seeing? What kind of things were they posting?
Well, they found evidence of jealousy, these subtle attempts to control each other, a constant need for validation. Their social media profiles presented this image of, a close-knit group of friends. But beneath the surface, there were clearly these tensions, these conflicts brewing.
Yeah, it's almost like their online world was a stage for their real-life drama.
Yeah.
A place to perform their friendship for an audience.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And as investigators dug deeper into their online activity, those inconsistencies in their stories, they started to unravel.
Right.
Remember those cryptic tweets from Skylar hinting at feeling betrayed?
Yeah.
Well, those became even more significant in light of their online behavior.
So what started as a missing person case slowly morphed into this potential homicide investigation.
Exactly. And that shift was driven by those two key factors: the mounting inconsistencies in Sheila and Rachel's stories, and the growing suspicion that Skylar's cryptic online messages, they weren't just, typical teenage angst.
Yeah.
They were actually cries for help. It was as if she was sensing danger, feeling trapped in this toxic friendship, and trying to signal that something was wrong.
Then months go by, the case goes cold. Then, in January 2013, comes the devastating discovery. Skylar's body is found in this remote wooded area across state lines in Pennsylvania, a location we should point out that Sheila was familiar with, having visited there with her family.
That discovery was a turning point in the case, confirmed everyone's worst fears, and it shifted the investigation into high gear. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, and the focus now narrowed in on finding Skylar's killer.
Yeah, I remember reading about this at the time. It was all over the news, and it must have just been this incredibly heartbreaking moment for her family and the entire community. Finally getting confirmation, but also facing this horrifying realization that she had been murdered.
Absolutely. And the fact that her body was found in such a remote location, a place that, again, Sheila knew well, just added another layer of intrigue and suspicion to the case.
Right.
It was like this puzzle piece falling into place, pointing investigators in a very specific direction.
And all eyes turn to Sheila and Rachel. They're brought in for questioning. The pressure mounts as they face this intense scrutiny, not just from law enforcement, but from the media as well.
This is where the investigation takes a dramatic turn. Remember all those inconsistencies we talked about in their stories?
Yeah.
Well, under the weight of that mounting evidence and the relentless questioning, their stories started to crumble. The truth, as they say, has a way of coming out.
And in this case, the truth was more shocking, more devastating than anyone could have imagined.
Under the intense pressure of the investigation, Rachel cracked first. She confessed to her involvement in Skyler's murder and agreed to cooperate with authorities.
Wow. Okay, so that must have been a huge turning point for the investigation. To have one of Skylar's closest friends, someone who had been maintaining her innocence for months, suddenly confess to being involved in her murder.
It was a pivotal moment. Rachel's confession not only implicated Sheila, but it also revealed the chilling motive behind this murder. Jealousy, anger stemming from, what seems like this trivial teenage drama.
Right.
It was a stark reminder that even these seemingly insignificant conflicts, when they're amplified by the intensity of these adolescent relationships and the pressures of social media, they can have these tragic and irreversible consequences.
It's almost impossible to comprehend how something so seemingly insignificant, teenage drama, jealousy, could lead to such a horrific act.
It's a stark reminder of the complexities of adolescence, right? This is
Mm.
a time of intense emotions, rapid social and psychological development,
Yeah.
this constant search for identity and belonging. And then you add in the pressures of social media, the constant comparison, the curated online personas, and it creates this breeding ground for insecurity, for jealousy, for conflict.
So you're saying that while the motive might seem trivial on the surface, it was actually a culmination of all these complex emotional and social dynamics that were playing out both online and offline.
Exactly. And this is something that the source material really delves into quite deeply. Examines the role of social media in shaping these girls' perceptions of themselves, their relationships, how it amplified their insecurities, fueled their jealousy, and ultimately how it contributed to this tragedy.
It's hard to believe that something as commonplace as teenage drama, something most of us have experienced in some form or another, could escalate to such a horrific act.
And that's what makes this case so disturbing, so thought-provoking. It shatters this illusion that violence and betrayal are somehow confined to certain demographics or social groups. This case reminds us that those dark impulses exist within human nature, and they can manifest anywhere at any time, regardless of age, social status, or outward appearances.
It's a sobering reminder that the line between those seemingly harmless conflicts and truly dangerous behavior, it can be terrifyingly thin,
Mhm.
especially when you factor in the amplifying effects of social media and just the intense, often volatile nature of teenage relationships.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of open communication, especially with young people. We need to create these safe spaces where they feel comfortable expressing their anxieties, their fears, their insecurities without judgment, without fear of reprisal. We need to equip them with the tools to navigate those complex social dynamics, both online and offline, and to recognize the warning signs of unhealthy relationships.
Skylar's story is a stark reminder that those seemingly insignificant conflicts, those anxieties, they can escalate quickly, and the consequences can be devastating. We often dismiss teenage drama as just a phase, but this case really shows us that those emotions, they're real, and they can have very real consequences.
Exactly. And it's not just about recognizing the warning signs in others, it's also about teaching young people to trust their own instincts. Skylar herself, she hinted at feeling betrayed, feeling mistrustful in her diary entries and her tweets. Her cousin even warned her mother about Sheila and Rachel. She sensed that something was off about their friendship.
It's like there were red flags all around, but they were either overlooked or dismissed as just typical teenage angst. It makes you wonder if things could have turned out differently if those warning signs had been taken more seriously.
That's a question that haunts a lot of people who followed this case. It highlights the importance of listening to young people, taking their concerns seriously, and trusting our own intuition when something just doesn't feel right. We can't always prevent tragedy, but we can strive to create a more supportive, more vigilant environment for young people, both online and in their personal lives.
So after Rachel's confession, what happened to Sheila?
Facing overwhelming evidence and the testimony of her former best friend, Sheila eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, second-degree murder. Both girls received sentences for their role in Skylar's death. Rachel was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Sheila received a 30-year sentence.
Their sentences, however, they couldn't bring Skylar back. And they couldn't erase the pain and devastation inflicted on her family and the community.
Yeah.
This case left a lasting impact on Morgantown. It forever changed the way people viewed teenage relationships and the potential dangers that could be lurking within those seemingly innocent online interactions.
Yeah. It also served as this wake-up call for a lot of parents, for educators, highlighting the importance of addressing the social and emotional challenges teenagers face in this digital age. This case really sparked a lot of conversations about online safety, about cyberbullying, the impact of social media on mental health, the need for more open communication between adults and young people.
It's a conversation that continues to this day. As technology evolves, as social media becomes even more integrated into our lives, it's crucial that we keep those conversations going, that we continue to learn from tragedies like this.
Skyler's case is this stark reminder that even in the digital age, human emotions, they remain incredibly powerful and unpredictable. And it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about human nature and the capacity for darkness that exists within all of us.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the Skylar Nees case, I'm left with this profound sense of sadness, but also this renewed determination to learn from this tragedy. It's a story that's going to stay with me. And I hope it serves as a catalyst for continued dialogue and action to create a safer and more supportive world for young people.
I think that's a great point to end on. And as you all continue to reflect on this deep dive, explore the source material you've gathered, consider how we can use our understanding of this tragedy to advocate for better online safety, mental health awareness, and support for young people who are navigating the complexities of modern friendships. What can we do individually and collectively to ensure that Skylar's story is not forgotten, that we learn from the mistakes of the past to create a better future?